We think we're so clever, we humans. We come up with all kinds of new ideas, all kinds of inventions, but it's kind of scary how often our most brilliant innovations blow up in our faces. Take plastic, for example.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Hey, it's great to have you with us here on Signs Radio. I'm in COVID-19 lockdown mode, recording from my house on a handheld audio recorder. So if the audio quality is not quite the same as in the studio, that's what's going on. And I'm talking to one of our authors who's written a great article in the March magazine, the March Signs of the Times. It's Julie Hoey. How are you, Julie?
I'm very well, thank you, Kent.
Excellent. So, Julie, you've written this article for us that addresses the issue of not so fantastic plastic. And certainly, over the last couple of years, people have become a lot more aware of the issue of plastics, and we're beginning to hear phrases like, single-use plastic. We've had supermarkets ban or at least make us pay for shopping bags and things like that. Do you get the sense that this whole issue of plastic is something that's sort of on the radar perhaps more than it has been in the past?
Yeah, definitely. As I read in one place, they were sort of saying that there was so much plastic around us in our everyday lives that we just took it for granted and didn't think twice about it. It was such a big part of our lives. But yes, definitely in the last 2 or 3 years, it's become a huge issue as people have realised the plastic waste, I think, was initially, really the big thing that people started seeing and realising that there was a problem.
Yeah, it's a complex issue, isn't it? Because I guess it's about technology, it's about consumerism, it's about, I guess, just the properties of the material itself. But I think what you've done in your article is really interesting because you've gone right back to the origins of where, what we call plastic today, where these plastics actually came from. Can you give us a thumbnail sketch of the history of plastic?
Yeah, well, I guess you'll get slightly different stories depending on where you do your research, but the general truth, as best it can be obtained looking back several decades, was that originally plastic sort of came into being by the desire to get a better material to make billiard balls with, because they were using ivory from elephant tusks, which obviously in this day and age we look at that and think how horrific it is from an animal, rights and animal care point of view. Mm-hmm. But from the perspective back then, it was the fact that being a natural material, it had lots of imperfections and didn't always, hold its shape. It was subject to, warping and changing shape with the weather and things like that. Mm-hmm. And you could get a huge shipment of ivory tusks and only a small percentage of it would be suitable for making balls. It had to be a good enough diameter and all that sort of thing. So it's, the story is that this led someone to say, come on, let's try and find a better material. And that's where it all started, that they were looking for a better material to make billiard balls with. They found it, they created it, they started making things with it. Then the war came and they discovered all the incredible things that they were able to make and use to supply the war effort.
Is this First World War? Is it Second World War? Which war?
I think we are talking the Second World War.
Right, okay.
During World War II, basically. Production in the United States tripled in terms of plastic. But then at the end of the war, they had all these plastic manufacturing factories and no more war effort needed. So that's when consumerism came in. They started, looking at how they could use this in everyday life, which is often the case. A lot of things that we take for granted in everyday life often have come from a military need initially. Yeah. So it was initially, trying to make a better product that served their purposes better. And I obviously we're really glad now in this day and age that, they stopped that reliance on elephant tusks, at least one element of reliance. But unfortunately, that probably wasn't their focus at the time, but it's a happy byproduct.
Yeah.
So as you say, very much a matter of technology. But, technology is just seeing a problem and trying to find a solution. So just, we've got these great people in our society who see a problem and try to solve it and try to find a better way of doing things, a better way of making things. And that's where plastic came from, and all the many different types of plastics that we have now.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, my mum sort of retelling the story of how when she was just a little girl in the 1950s, and there was this amazing new product called Bakelite.
Yes.
and how incredibly revolutionary this was, and hey, it's hard and you can drop it and it won't break, and in terms of making plates and this sort of stuff. I mean, at that point it was like, wow, plastic, it's this miracle product. It can be mass produced.
Absolutely.
So much cheaper. It was an absolute revolution, and I guess the 1950s were a time of that sort of post-war prosperity, and so I guess the time was
huge social change.
Yeah, the time was right for a whole lot of new products to sort of come on the market. Now, Julie, you have a background as a science teacher.
Yes.
So can you explain to us, like when we talk about plastic, what exactly is it, like from a chemistry point of view?
Yeah.
Just don't get into too much detail because I'll start to glaze over, but can you give us a sort of a thumbnail sketch?
Yeah, so plastic is actually an adjective rather than a noun as we tend to use it. And
Right.
So a substance that is plastic, we might also think of it as having a plasticity, which means it can be moulded and shaped into whatever shape we want it to be.
Right, so sometimes we talk about neuroplasticity, which we're talking about the brains of children and young people, that they have very plastic brains in the sense that their brains are able to be formed and new pathways are able to be formed in them very easily. So this is a similar idea, but I guess a more physical product of something that's pliable, that's able to be moulded and bent and moved.
The more correct chemical term is a polymer, which just means that you've got a unit, a molecular unit that is repeated over and over again. So very long chain polymers, and they're able to sort of slip and slide past each other at a micro level, which is what makes them plastic or mouldable.
Right.
And so really. And another term that you might come across is the term thermoplastic, which means when you heat it up, you're able to remold it into another shape. And so that's where we get, our recyclable plastics and that sort of thing from to a certain degree. There's other ways of recycling as well. And
are they like petroleum products at their basis? Like, is this taken from oil and things like that?
Yes, that's right. So that's one of the issues with plastic, is that the majority, during this boom time and the golden years of plastic, that they have been produced from petroleum. So we've got the added issue of all those sorts of pollution issues and running out of the source material issues and that sort of thing, and environmental mining issues and so on.
Yeah, you point out in your article that this new miracle product was incredible because, hey, it lasts forever. It's incredible. We won't ever have to buy another one of these again. And this actually turned out to be the downfall of plastic because it lasts forever in landfill.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, and doesn't last forever well enough to really last forever. Particularly a lot of the ones that we see now, they do start to fade and chip and crack and that sort of thing. I mean, I actually still have some plastic bowls and containers of a certain brand that I maybe shouldn't mention from my mother's early married life. I still have them working perfectly well in my kitchen.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do have that longevity.
Yeah.
And yes, exactly. Their miracle property became their worst element.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Tupperware then. and I understand, but although I have Tupperware products in my house, that I'm looking for a Tupperware representative to give me some new lids that actually fit, because they don't fit anymore. So, they were supposed to come with a lifetime guarantee, weren't they?
Very good with their lifetime guarantee, I believe. But yes, the ones from my mother's era are still going strong.
Wow, no, that's incredible. So what efforts have been made to, I guess, we mentioned before, we're looking at why do we have single-use plastics? Should we stop doing that? Supermarkets have, in Australia, have decided not to provide us free plastic bags anymore. Are there other particular efforts that are being made to sort of reduce, I guess there's recycling, isn't there?
Well, I suppose there's the mantra, the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra in all sorts of environmental concerns. So in terms of getting rid of single-use plastics, that's focusing on the reduce, attack, trying to reduce our reliance on single-use plastics because, that's just straight out contributing to plastic waste, completely unnecessarily in so many cases. So I guess reuse is where we're looking at finding other ways, to repurpose things. That's not necessarily a huge focus for plastics necessarily, but certainly recycling, we put a lot of efforts into recycling over the past probably 20 years, and then we discovered a couple of years ago that a lot of it wasn't actually being recycled. It was being shipped off to other countries that needed our money, and one of those major countries, China, decided that they didn't want most of our recycling anymore. So that was a big wake-up call for Australians who, thought they were all doing the right thing by putting everything in the recycling bin and sorting all their recycling and so on, only to discover that probably the end result was nowhere near the magnitude that they thought it was in terms of how much was being recycled. Yeah.
What's the difficulty there? Is it that it just costs too much to pay people to recycle, or is it that the technical process of recycling doesn't produce the right kind of plastic or enough plastic? Like, do you have a sense of what the barriers are there?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know why we were taking it offshore, although I guess we do that with a lot of things, send our problems overseas or whatever. And there have been a lot of efforts to find ways to recycle, and, people have been making furniture with recycled plastic, making road base with crushed up plastic and that sort of thing. It may just be a factor of the incredible volume of plastic waste that we produce, that it's just hard to find enough, to make enough products to deal with that recycling as being one of the problems, But, even locally around where I live, there's a company where you can, schools and institutions can send their plastic product to and plastic waste and actually get furniture back to put in their workplaces and, around the schoolyard and that sort of thing.
Right.
The efforts are there, but I think part of the problem on a worldwide global scale is just the huge volume of plastic waste that we produce, and possibly also that, there may be other countries that don't have the infrastructure and the finances to operate recycling programs to the extent that need to be done, perhaps.
When I was a kid, we just used to chuck all this in the incinerator. Do you remember when everyone in the backyard had an incinerator? Which is just a polite word for just burn it and let all these toxic fumes go. It's sort of pretty horrific, isn't it? Now, obviously, most of us are aware of, recycling and council recycling. We, like you say, most of us try to do the right thing, and we're, I guess, crossing our fingers and hoping that our government's going to do a better job, perhaps, sorting this out in the near future. But in your article, Julie, you mention a number of really interesting, quite innovative solutions to the issues of plastic. Can you just run through some of those for us? Because they were quite fascinating. I don't reckon a lot of our listeners would have heard of some of these before.
Yeah, so there's, as I mentioned, you've got reduce, reuse, recycle, and I think perhaps another one we could add on there as far as plastic goes is re-engineer. So there's two sort of main pathways that a lot of researchers and so on are going down. One of the pathways is trying to make plastic biodegradable. So that's its big problem, as we've identified, that it just doesn't break down. So they're looking at all sorts of different organisms that have maybe developed the ability to biodegrade plastic naturally, finding the enzymes responsible, tweaking those enzymes so that they can look realistically on a large scale to actually biodegrade the plastic back down to its original molecules, so to speak, so that, it can actually go back in more into the sort of life cycle, I suppose, the ecosystem sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, there's been quite a few different discoveries and research along that pathway of finding either bacteria, microorganisms or enzymes that can actually biodegrade the plastic that we currently use. So that's one pathway. The other pathway is it's sort of becoming full circle in some ways and going back to where we used to be, that they're looking at making plastics from non-petroleum bases, so using more natural products again rather than synthetic products, so that plastic then becomes inherently biodegradable and we don't have to look for organisms that will biodegrade it. So
is cellulose one of those?
That's right. Cellulose is basically what forms the wall in the cells of plants. So animals, and including humans, we don't have a wall around our cells, we just have a membrane, whereas plants have a much hardier wall, and that's made from cellulose. So plants and trees and bark and all sorts of plant tissues have heaps of cellulose in it, and that's one area. So we're looking at sugarcane derived bioplastic film, like Glad wrap type of thing, made from cotton processing waste. So all that sort of thing. Cornstarch is being used to create fibres for clothing rather than using polyesters and those sorts of synthetic fibres that are really just a plastic in a sense. Yeah, so that's one avenue. The other avenue is one that really interests me, is a company that's using a cellophane-like bioplastic produced by bees as a nesting material. They're actually trying to find the gene that tells the bees how to make that material, and actually then use that DNA, inject it into bacteria and get the bacteria to produce that material en masse. So, yeah, there is some amazing research going on. And even since I wrote that article, you just keep seeing more and more different types of research and development that's going on around the world, trying to make plastic that is inherently biodegradable. And the only problem, of course, is we're getting, a lot of those examples that I gave, they're using the waste products from industries that already exist, which is great, closing that loop a little bit.
Yeah.
But I can see we have to be very careful that we could become so reliant on it that we might run out of waste product. We may not have enough waste product that we need. And then again, you might start sort of ripping into nature, trying to get the source material once again, and we sort of might get back to that original point where we were, we decimated the elephant population, getting the ivory from their tusks. So I know in this day and age, from a research and development perspective, our researchers do try to think through the whole life cycle and really think ahead to where it's going to go and what the potential problems and implications are. So that's hopefully, going to be happening in all of this sort of research that's going on. Yeah,
and I guess that's the theme of your article in some ways, isn't it? This whole idea of unintended consequences, that, we humans are so clever and we come up with all these amazing technologies, we set these revolutions in motion, and then it's only a little bit down the track, suddenly we realise, unintended consequences. And when you talk about, some of these things like, hey, let's genetically engineer bees, to make whatever, I just think, what sort of, GMO bees are we going to release on the world, and what unintended consequences are there? I mean, are you hopeful that humanity will be able to find the answers to these problems, or are you a bit dubious, or somewhere in the middle, or what?
Yeah, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I mean, in terms of engineering bacteria to produce various things, one of the really great success stories along that is the production of insulin, so that insulin-dependent diabetics, they just used to die, whereas now we've had great success with being able to synthetically produce insulin, and now they don't have to die, So we do have some great success stories. I think we just have to keep on doing the best we can and looking for the best solutions and really thinking through the whole life cycle of the solution that we come up with. I think a big part of the problem, and I hate to say it, but a big part of the problem is our population in terms of globally we have so many people and we have rising standards of living, quite understandably. that we, whatever we do it on such a decimating scale. Whatever we produce, we have to produce so much of it to feed or satisfy the enormous population that we have. I think that's a big part of the problem, and that's not necessarily going to go away, but, that's where we have to become really clever and hopefully, just really care about our earth. And there's obviously a lot of people that do, but sadly there are some people out there who sort of don't and who think there's no problem and that, everything's just hunky-dory and we're overstating the situation. But, hopefully, I'm probably in the middle there somewhere that we can come up with some really good solutions, but we do have a lot of challenges along the way, particularly from a population perspective.
Yeah, I think I probably tend not to be quite so, negative on the population sort of side of things because I believe it's due to sort of flatten out, the curve is due to flatten out by about 2050, I think they say. In Europe, population statistics are actually going backwards at the minute. Well, if it wasn't for immigration from other countries. So, but I think you make a really good point to say that if all, 7 billion of us on this planet all expect to consume at Western country sort of levels, well, even if there isn't a huge increase in population, that is going to be a huge burden on the Earth's resources. Yeah,
and I think you've probably heard the saying, we don't need to do it perfectly. We don't, if you're concerned about plastic, you don't have to totally get yourself into a knot to make your life completely plastic free and all that sort of thing. As they say, it just takes a heck of a lot of people doing a little bit, making a small change. I just read an article recently about how much plastic waste comes out of hospitals because there's an enormous amount of single-use plastic used in the medical and health industries because of sterilisation and hygiene issues.
Yeah.
And it was looking at if they replaced just one particular product with a reusable, sterilisable product like they used to use, if they went back to that sort of a product, I don't know if it was a single hospital or I can't quite remember now, but it was something like, 20 billion tonnes of plastic waste that would be saved just from changing one product's use, So
Goodness.
It just takes a lot of us making some small changes could make a significant difference.
Yeah. Julie, I guess I really get a sense that there's a similar theme sort of developing like in your writing. So the last article you wrote for us, which was late last year, that was called Pestilence, that seems incredibly relevant right now with the COVID-19 crisis.
My goodness.
Talked about how climate change is basically having an effect of releasing new bacteria, like new mosquito-borne diseases, and then we have superbugs in hospitals, because of possibly, overuse of antibiotics, and now we've got this COVID-19 situation, which, appears to be from, eating animals that probably were never supposed to be eaten, and possibly coming into contact with those wild animals because of environmental destruction, deforestation, to the point where, and I guess poverty, overpopulation, to the point where people feel that they want to eat a bat or a pangolin, a scaly anteater or whatever. And it just really seems to me that in all of these cases, humanity, like, we've sort of brought this on ourselves in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, you've listed off an incredible complex lot of issues. There's so many challenges and difficulties going on in the world. I guess a lot of us are just doing the best we can and getting along in life. I mean, there are probably a lot of people, not a lot of people, but at the top echelon of money makers perhaps who, have a real focus on making money and aren't as concerned with what sort of impact they have on the environment. And, it really comes down a lot to the fact that we really like our standard of living and our lifestyle, and we haven't really been concerned about what effect and consequences that has for the planet.
Yeah.
So, we really have to take responsibility for that. I think, as I said in this article, actually, there may be no perfect solution to the problem of plastic waste, but if you enjoy this beautiful planet that we have, we can't turn a blind eye. And I think that's what it comes down to. If you like where you live, if you love this planet and all the beauty that we have and the incredible creatures and animals and ecosystems. There's so much beauty and wonder in this world. If we want to protect that and keep it, then we can't do nothing. We have to at least try and do the best we can.
Yeah, I see your point. I guess I just have the sense that sometimes we are, taken with our own cleverness, and we should be realizing by now that we're sometimes not as clever as we think we are. We maybe need to be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more careful. And I guess I just think of some of that ancient wisdom, from the Bible that makes it clear that we as humanity, have a really important responsibility when it comes to the natural world. We're here to look after it. We have a job of stewardship. It's not, something we should be neglecting.
Yeah, that's true. And, I have to say my worldview has always been a Christian worldview, and I've grown up, with a belief that Jesus will eventually come back and put everything right and make everything right. And it's actually allowed me to, I guess, live a life without being really worried and depressed about the state of the world. But I think you're right. We can't just kind of sit back and go, it's okay, God's going to fix it all one day. He actually does expect us, if we look at the Bible, he does actually expect us to look after the world while we're in it now, not just, trash it and wait for him to come back and fix it.
Yeah. And I guess it's probably wrong in some ways to sort of separate, the natural world from our fellow human beings. I mean, we're all, God's creations. We're all precious. We're all worth looking after. And perhaps, I guess, like you say, we need to direct a little more of our cleverness at making sure we are, looking after each other and looking after the planet we've been gifted with, during the short time, perhaps that we still have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much, Julie. I really appreciate you being part of Signs of the Times Radio this week, and thanks also for writing for us in the March edition of the magazine.
My pleasure. Thank you very much too, Kent. I appreciate it.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.